In the autumn of 1944, the triumphant momentum that had carried the Allies across France came to a grinding halt in Holland. Operation Market Garden, the daring airborne assault intended to secure a bridgehead across the Rhine, had failed. For the men of the 101st Airborne, including Easy Company, the aftermath was a brutal, static war fought along a series of dikes, canals, and waterlogged fields known as the Island. This was a different kind of war than the one they had fought in Normandy. It was a cold, wet, and miserable existence, defined by trench warfare, constant artillery barrages, and the ever-present danger of German patrols probing their lines in the dead of night. The landscape offered little cover, and every patrol into the flat, open polders was a roll of the dice. It was in this tense and unforgiving environment that Major Dick Winters, now serving as the 2nd Battalion's executive officer, would face one of the most profound moral tests of his life. The incident would not be a grand battle or a tactical victory, but a quiet, personal encounter in a frozen forest that revealed the true measure of the man. By this point in the war, Dick Winters had been promoted out of direct command of Easy Company. His new role as an executive officer was one of strategic planning and coordination, a position that should have kept him safely behind the front lines. But Winters was not a man who could lead from a map table when his soldiers were in danger. He felt an immense and personal responsibility for the men he had trained and led since Camp Tokoa. Knowing the perilous nature of the Dutch front, he frequently joined or led reconnaissance patrols himself, venturing deep into enemy territory to gather intelligence and assess the German positions firsthand. He refused to ask his men to take risks that he was unwilling to take himself. This dedication to his men is what placed him in harm's way on that fateful day. He was not required to be on that patrol. He chose to be there. It was this unwavering commitment to his soldiers' welfare, this need to share their risks, that set the stage for a split-second encounter that would test the very foundations of his moral code. The patrol was typical for the time and place, a small team moving cautiously through the bleak, wintry landscape of Holland. The objective was to probe the German lines, identify their strength, and locate any potential weaknesses. The air was cold, the ground was wet, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig could signal a deadly ambush. As they moved deeper into enemy-held territory, the tension was palpable. This was a sniper's paradise, a place where a single, well-aimed shot could come from any direction at any moment. The men moved with the practiced silence of veterans, their senses on high alert, scanning the trees and ditches for any sign of movement. It was during this cautious advance that Winters became separated from his men for a moment, moving ahead to scout the path. In the quiet of the forest, alone and exposed, he suddenly found himself face to face with the enemy. The moment he had trained for and survived 100 times was upon him once again. Out of the gloom, a figure emerged, a young German soldier, just as surprised by the encounter as Winters was. For a split second, the two men froze, locked in the primal tableau of hunter and hunted. The German reacted first. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot. The bullet tore through the air, missing Winters' head by mere inches. The sharp crack of the rifle echoed through the silent forest, a sound that should have been Winters' death knell. In that instant, he was no longer a major or a commander. He was a target who had, by the slimmest of margins, escaped death. Most soldiers, faced with such a near miss, would have immediately sought cover or returned fire with overwhelming force. The instinct for self-preservation is a powerful one. But Dick Winters was not most soldiers. His reaction would be as swift and unexpected as the attack itself. Instead of diving for cover, Winters reacted with the aggressive instinct that had defined his leadership since D-Day. He lunged forward. Before the German soldier could chamber another round or correct his aim, Winters tackled him, driving him to the frozen ground in a flurry of movement. In a matter of seconds, the situation was completely reversed. The hunter had become the hunted. Winters had the young German pinned, his weapon knocked aside. The soldier was disarmed, helpless, and completely at his mercy. The immediate threat was neutralized. Now Winters faced a new and more complex decision. The rules of war were clear. An armed enemy combatant was a legitimate target. This soldier had just tried to kill him. The logical, and arguably the safest course of action was to eliminate the threat permanently. His men, hearing the shot, were rushing to his position. He had only seconds to act. With the young German soldier pinned beneath him, the adrenaline of the fight gave way to a moment of stark clarity. This was no longer a tactical problem to be solved. It was a moral one. The soldier was defeated, his life now resting entirely in Winters's hands. The easy clinical violence of a firefight was gone, replaced by the deeply personal act of deciding whether a disarmed man should live or die. The soldier's training, the instinct for survival, and the brutal logic of war all screamed for one outcome: eliminate the enemy. This was not a place for sentiment. A spared enemy could return to fight another day, could kill one of his own men. The risk of showing mercy was immense. Yet, in that crucial moment, Winters paused. He looked down at the man he held captive and saw something that gave him pause. The decision he made in that instant would not be dictated by the logic of war, but by the code of a man who refused to let the brutality of his environment extinguish his own humanity. What Winters saw in that moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. Looking down at the German soldier, he didn't see a hardened, fanatical warrior of the Third Reich. He saw a boy. The soldier's face was etched not with hatred, but with pure, unadulterated terror. He was, by Winters's estimation, barely 16 years old. I saw the terror in his eyes. Winters would later write in his memoir. In that moment of life and death, the uniforms and ideologies melted away, leaving only one human being confronting the terrified face of another. This was not a soldier who posed a continued threat. This was a frightened child who had likely been conscripted into a war he barely understood. For Winters, killing this terrified, defeated boy felt less like an act of war and more like an execution. It was a line he was unwilling to cross. He had proven he was a formidable and effective killer of enemy combatants, but he refused to become a simple executioner of a child. In that moment of decision, Winters was guided by a principle that had been instilled in him long before he ever put on a uniform. He often recalled the simple but profound advice his father had given him: "You can be tough without being cruel." This was a mantra that shaped his leadership throughout the war. He had proven his toughness time and again, from the grueling training at Tokoa to the bloody fields of Normandy. But he always drew a firm line between the necessary hardness of a soldier and the needless cruelty of a tyrant. Executing a terrified, disarmed boy fell squarely on the side of cruelty. So he made his choice. He disarmed the soldier completely, ensuring he was no longer a threat, and then he did the unthinkable. He let him go. He watched as the young German scrambled to his feet and disappeared back into the forest, giving him a second chance at life. It was an act of mercy that defied the brutal logic of the battlefield. The few men on the patrol who witnessed this event were stunned. In a war where taking no prisoners was often an unofficial but common practice, their commander had just released an enemy soldier who had moments before tried to kill him. It was a decision that many would have questioned. Some of his soldiers may have seen it as a dangerous risk, a moment of softness in a world that demanded hardness. But for others, it became a defining moment of Winters's leadership. He had demonstrated, in the most personal way imaginable, that his integrity was uncompromising. He showed them that it was possible to be a lethal and effective soldier without sacrificing one's moral compass. This act of mercy was a powerful, unspoken lesson. It reinforced the idea that they were fighting not just to defeat an enemy, but to uphold a standard of conduct. Winters led by example, and his example on that day was that their humanity was a weapon the enemy could not defeat. Dick Winters would reflect on this incident for the rest of his life. It was not a famous battle, but this quiet, personal moment in a Dutch forest that he often returned to in his thoughts. It served as a constant reminder of the moral complexities of war and the difficult choices good men must make in the worst of circumstances. The decision to spare the young German reinforced his belief in the importance of restraint and moral courage. It became a cornerstone of his post-war advocacy for reconciliation and understanding. He had seen the face of his enemy and had chosen to see the human being behind it, a perspective that he carried with him long after the guns fell silent. In the end, this quiet act of mercy says as much about his character as any of his celebrated tactical victories. It shows a leader who was not only a master of war, but also a man who never lost sight of his own humanity. He was tough, but he was never cruel, and in that simple distinction lies the true measure of his greatness.